Hello, my name is Virgil and this is Literally Books. Today, I want to talk about Ramsey Campbell's novel, Midnight Sun. Now, I just did, or will at the same time be releasing my review of Clark Ashton Smith's City of Singing Flame. And you do not have to watch that video, but I am going to talk about that story to some extent, or at least about Smith's writing and sort of contrast with what Campbell is doing here. Because I think they're trying to do the same thing. In one case, I think it works. In another case, it could have worked, but doesn't work very well. So in 1991, Ramsey Campbell, Midnight Sun. It's about a small English town called Stargrave, which I thought was very funny because there's a war game called Stargrave. Every time I saw Stargrave, I thought, the war game? No. Anyways, that doesn't matter. It's nothing to do with the story. It's about the main character, Ben Sterling, who as a child his parents have passed away, and he sneaks off from his aunt's house and is like trying to get back to Stargrave because he wants to get back to their house, right? And that opening sequence I read, I thought, oh, this is going to be a really good book. I really liked how it started off. I really liked what it was doing. Okay. So we get that little opening sequence with him when he's very young, and then we get some sort of flashback stuff to sort of like I guess you could say a little bit of like family saga stuff of like the unusual quality of the Sterling family in the past, and some hints about some things, and we get a little bit about Ben when he was growing up, and then we flash forward to Ben married to his wife Ellen, and he's a writer of children's stories, and she illustrates them. Okay, once that part starts, once we get to adult Ben, it's like, okay, cool, this makes sense. Like, it's like, okay, like this is the legacy, and now here we are, and it's now, what's going to happen? It was just, I don't know, there's too much of that. There's too much of this mundane activity. We get, Ben's aunt, who sort of like had control of the original family house in Stargrave and her own home, passes away. Ben and his wife like go to visit the house, and there's a little bit of creepy scene right there, just a tiny little bit, and they decide they're going to like and meanwhile Ben's like negotiating a book deal, and him and his wife are that he's written, of course, and she's illustrated, and they're negotiating that, and there's some difficulty with that, and the families, they're trying to convince the kids that they have a son and a daughter, if they want to go and live there, and the kids do, and so they decide to live there, and there's like I said, they go there for the first time. Ben goes back to Stargate for the first time in a long time, and there's a kind of like a small creepy scene there. It's like, ooh, this is kind of cool. Okay, this is gonna start now. And then they get moved in, and then there's some more backstory, and it just keeps going. We just keep getting more of like the book deal, and talk about like the writing, and like Ben getting inspired. And then about halfway, there was a scene that was genuinely very creepy. I know it had to be creepy, and I say I know it had to be creepy. It had to be creepy because it was like I like woke up one morning a little early, like a Saturday morning. I think I woke up, early for me because I work late, but woke up early, and I was kind of like laying in bed, like waking up, kind of reading it for about 20 minutes. And I was like, oh, this is really creepy. And this is like, I just woke up, and this is the morning. It's bright outside. This must be creepy. This is book. All right, the book is taken off. Nope. After that, it's like, hey, we're done talking about that for now. And then it was like 40% more of the book was just mundane stuff, and like Ben acting weirder and weirder, but not really weird, and not like super weird, like The Shining Jack Torrance weird, but like, I mean, just kind of like a little off, and like kind of like, I would say kind of like soap opera-ish drama. And then at the very end of the book, we get back to the really creepy stuff, and then it's like all the stuff happens, like whoa, and it's all packed into like the last 2 chapters, and then it's like done. And I was just, and I knew it was just bad when it got to like 80%, and I'm like, oh, it's ramping up now. It's how far am I? Oh my gosh, 80% of the way through the book, and we're just now finally getting to this. And what's frustrating about this is that the writing is good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Ramsey Campbell's writing. He's got really excellent use of imagery here. Definitely can evoke some creepy stuff if he wants to. I totally get it that he's building tension totally normal in a horror novel for there to be some mundane sort of discussion so that you can build from that, so you can sort of establish a normalcy to build tension and horror from. But it just stayed way too long. This book, this really, I feel like would have been a good, or would be a good novella if you cut like 30 or 40% of it out. It doesn't really do anything. There's a whole like side thing with Ellen where she's talking about how she used to be an artist and she worked for this firm and how her work was stolen, and all that's fine for character development, but it doesn't go anywhere. And there's probably 2 or 3 chapters of it, at least 2 chapters of it. It just was too much. It was like too much of my time was taken up with that, and then too much of my time was the kids are doing this play, and the kids are doing this thing, and and what about don't upset the children, and it didn't come off as like, I didn't feel nervous for the family exactly. Not because I didn't care about them, but because it just didn't really, it wasn't engaging me. It was just sort of like I was waiting, like I picked up this book to be like scared or horrified or to be creeped out or something. And it was like, you gave me a taste of it halfway, and then it's like we just backed off from it so hard. Now, like I said, the imagery and the writing is really good. And those creepy scenes that we get some very good stuff in the beginning. I feel like there's some really good building in like the first fifth of the book when Ben is young. I thought that building up, that like sort of like establishing the mythology that this book is sort of building on, was really, had a great setup, right? What it did, which is more of just like a scary scene or a creepy scene, I guess you could say, just before halfway with Ben in the woods, was also like a moment of like, whoa, that's okay, that's a little creepy. Yeah, I kind of fell into it too, like kind of like he's distracted and this thing happens and he kind of has like a moment of like, whoa, wait a minute. And I reading it was like, oh wow, I fell kind of into it. I fell into that too, almost with him, and I thought that was excellent. And there's some really kind of like, what I think Campbell does really well is a sort of surrealistic sort of horror that he can do, right? At the end. The other thing that I've read of Campbell's recently is his Hungry Moon. And that's novel, to sort of rehash that a little bit. Starts off sort of like, maybe like it's going to be some sort of a cult. Moves into the small English town and sort of takes over with their sort of cultish ways. And you're like, oh, this is going to be like a weird like cult novel. And then it just kind of, then that novel from there just goes completely bonkers. Bonkers sounds a little too silly, but it gets very strange, very weird. All the gloves are off, right? Anything goes at a certain point in that novel. And I really liked how we did it. I really liked how nuts it got. And this book does that too, but it's just like this time between like what you thought this book was going to be and when it got really weird and really nuts is all that is way too much. There's way too much of that stuff, I think, which is unfortunate because again, I really wanted more of that mythology built. I wanted to see where he could go with that. I liked the weird imagery, all about this sort of like cold, like this entity that existed in the like before everything else. That's just like cold, and like this sort of, I don't know how you would explain it, like almost like an evil spirit, or you could say, or like an evil god or something, or just sort of an otherworldly god, a Cthulhu-esque god maybe, that is all like ice and cold and snow and maybe the forest and all these other things and all wrapped up. And man, that I am totally sold on that idea from Campbell. He landed it. I mean, it's good. It just doesn't get used enough. And it was just a shame. It's just a shame because I think there's some great stuff here. I really wish that we had taken that final sequence and just, if that had been expanded like to 30% of its size, if that had taken more time and built up and had been more strange, and we had just cut down on some of the other mundane family stuff that just made the novel long, but didn't really build tension or like work with anything else. It didn't add to anything. It didn't add to the experience. It just felt like something I had to read to get through to what I showed up for. I don't know. I guess I was bored at some point, and I was just bored too long. And then I started picking apart like the interactions of the characters and becoming very annoyed with them. Right? That's not a good sign. Like now it's like I'm not even engaged enough. I'm just trying to get through this section, and so now I'm just sort of like I don't know. These kids are like this, and this is like this. Of course, you're going to complain. Of course, he's a terrible father. So if you can't tell, not a recommendation. Not a recommendation. If you could find this book at a library or get it cheap, maybe try and read those sections. Try and read the initial section with Ben when he's young, right? Then skip ahead and trying to have a little bit of context somehow, I guess, to Ben about 40 to 50% of the way through the book, where he goes in a Sterling Forest and he's kind of like wanders out there by himself. And then read like the last 3 or 4 chapters in the book where the surrealistic horror, right, where the very strange things come out, and you really like this thing that you've been building towards finally reveals itself, so to speak. And even at the end there, I just felt like it didn't have enough time. It didn't have enough time to breathe, and so it kind of came off as silly and abrupt, right? The main character, Ben, has a motivation change at the very end of the book that just felt so abrupt to me that it didn't work. It just didn't work. That all needed more time and space to breathe in, and it just didn't have it. But like the cold and ice and snow imagery that Campbell builds are just great. Now, I mentioned I was going to compare Campbell's story to Clark Ashton Smith's story, the City of Singing Flame and Beyond the Singing Flame that's in here that I just read. I finished just before I finished this novel. And I think they're both kind of doing something similar, right? Midnight Sun also doesn't really seem very interested in the plot. The plot is not very important in this, right? It's more about setting up the scene for you to view, and the imagery, that is strange and weird and creepy, right? And it works just like an honest, and it's also sort of interesting because we have fire imagery here in the City of Singing Flame. We have ice and cold imagery in Midnight Sun. And I think they're in a similar way. They're doing similar things. They're doing this sort of exploring like the scene, the setting, and really evoking it, really making these very memorable images in your head that don't really have a specific action or sort of event associated with them. It's sort of like a thing that you can sort of look around and explore and feel strangely about. Here in the City of Singing Flame is sort of a sense of awe or wonder, not exact, and maybe a little bit of like strange dreaminess. Like you're not really sure, you don't really feel worried, but you're not sure if you should, right? In the City of Singing Flame, it's kind of what's going on here. And in Campbell's story, it's sort of like, definitely for me, like evoking all this cold, a feeling of being cold and what it's like to be cold in this, and to be out in the cold, and the way it sounds, the way it smells, the way it looks, the way it feels, all those things, and then putting this sense of like something there with you at the same time. Like that's a presence, and I think he just, like I said, just totally lands it in the same way that Ashton Smith lands those weird dreamlike qualities. Campbell lands this sort of creepy, cold forest imagery just perfectly. The difference is that Smith's story is significantly shorter, and that if it had been a lot of stuff about the main characters in that story and their writing career, obviously also very similar, right? Because the main characters in both of these stories are writers. If there had been a lot more talk about the writing career and like publication difficulties that the main character had in the City of Singing Flame, I don't think it would be a very popular story. I mean, it's not one of Smith's best known stories anyways. That's not anything to say other than just that it isn't. But it is a very good story. And This story by Ramsey Campbell is also not his best known story, but I can't really recommend it because of what you have to go through. It's really strange for me to even suggest that you should, if you were to get the book, to only read parts of it. And I don't even know if that's going to work. I don't even know if you can read that, but I can't. Maybe it would be fine if you're a very fast reader. And maybe those scenes will be fine and it won't bother you. I just think that it takes too long, and that the thing that you come to a horror book for is the horror and the creepiness and the weird imagery. And it just is too much of the other stuff. A comparison can be made to The Shining, and you could take the stuff in The Shining where it's just about Jack trying to write, but he can't, and he's struggling with that. And if you just made those sections of The Shining significantly longer, if you just made them, like, added 20% more of that, well, that kind of, it brings everything else down. And that's the part of the problem, is that it sort of like de-escalates the event that's happening at Midnight Sun, which is a shame. I still really enjoy Ramsey Campbell. I'm still convinced that I like his writing a lot. It's just that I think this novel needed to be shorter, for whatever reason. But I think that it's doing something similar to Smith's sort of Weird Tales, City of Singing Flame and Beyond the Singing Flame. I think it's doing the same sort of thing. If it had been if it was pared down to a similar length, I think we'd be like, ooh, that's a really good Ramsey Campbell story. Have you ever read Midnight Sun? Oh man, it's so good. Oh, it's all this weird, creepy ice imagery and snow and this forest and everything. And it's like, yeah, it's really great. So vivid, so like gets its teeth into you, right? It sinks its claws into you. Ooh, it does. But you have to get through too much to get to that. It's too long, and there's threads that aren't that are introduced that aren't really dealt with. Like, there's other character development, but they're just not necessary to make us care about those characters. I just don't think so. I mean, I don't think, as a reader, I don't know that you need a lot of convincing that you should be worried about kids. And the more you have like downtime with these kids and the mom, and they're thinking their dad's being weird, the more you just sort of get annoyed with it. You're like, ugh, I'm tired of like watching these people just have their daily interactions and like, oh, I asked your dad to pick you up from school, and he did, but he did say this one weird thing. And it's like, that was a chapter. Like, I didn't like that. I'm really glad that I read it, because I do appreciate this book for what I got out of it, right? I think even when a book isn't great, like, for example, The Gods Abide, that Chris and Brian and I all talked about recently. I'm not sure where that falls as far as being out there at the same time of this, but we just did that. Even The Gods Abide, I got something out of, even if it was only a laugh, or even if it was only like, oh, I always try to get something out of a book. I'll read more of Ramsey Campbell for sure. I'm not putting him off. I'm not shelving him as a writer or anything like that. I just kind of was hoping for Midnight Sun to do more than what it did in a shorter time span. That's it. Thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe is always appreciated. This is going to come out either right on the heels of or at the same time as that Clark Ashton Smith video. That's all I got for now. Bye.